everyone, and welcome to Weathersfield Proctor Library Storytime. I'm Glenna Coleman, Youth Services Librarian, and here's our library bear. He's feeling a little out of it because he's sort of a tame bear, and he wanted to hear some stories about wild things. So we have a couple of wild stories for you today. Our first wild story is called The Wild Toboggan Ride. And this is by Suzan Reid and Eugenie Fernandes. So, let's open it up and find out who is who. There we go. The Wild Toboggan Ride. That's quite a sledding hill. We don't really have a lot of snow yet, but I'm sure it's coming. There we go. The afternoon was crisp and quiet. Nikki pulled her long toboggan to the top of the hill where Grandpa Dan was standing, tapping his boot in the snow. "Come along," he frowned. "I'm chilled to the bone. Fiddlesticks to snow." "Please, Grandpa Dan, just one more ride," pleaded Nikki. "Oh, fiddlesticks," sniffed Grandpa Dan. "Nasty weather." "Will you push me, please?" Nikki begged. "Phooey, this is the last one, then." Grandpa Dan leaned over to give Nikki a tiny push on her long toboggan. As he bent over, he stepped on his extra long scarf and his foot slipped. Bump! Oomph! Crash! Grandpa Dan landed on the back of the long toboggan with Nikki on his lap. "Yahoo!" yelled Nikki. "Good grief!" gasped Grandpa Dan. "How do you steer this thing?" Down the hill they went, gathering speed, with Grandpa Dan's extra long scarf flapping in the wind. "Yahoo!" Nikki yelled again. Uh-oh. They reached the bottom of the hill, and the toboggan swerved left. "Whoa!" sputtered Grandpa Dan from behind his extra long scarf. "I can't see a thing." Bump! Oomph! Crash! The baker crossing the street landed on top of Grandpa Dan and Nikki. Let's see if we can get a better picture of this here. That's quite an event. "Good grief, move up!" yelled Grandpa Dan. "What on earth are you doing, Dan?" asked the baker. "Trying to steer this confounded contraption. Move your head, I can't see a thing." Along the street zoomed Grandpa Dan, Nikki, and the baker, all on the long toboggan. I'll give you a moment to make a prediction. What do you think will happen next? Bump! Oomph! Crash! The barber, locking up his shop, landed on top of the baker. "Heavens! Find your own spot," said the baker. "Quiet down up there, I can't see a thing," yelled Grandpa Dan. Along the street and into the park went Grandpa Dan, Nikki, the baker, and the barber, all on the long toboggan. What do you think will happen next? Well, let's turn the page and see if you're right. Bump! Oomph! Crash! The police chief, on his way home from work, landed on top of the barber. "Get your foot off my head," said the barber. "Wowza, Dan, do you have a license for this thing?" asked the police chief. "Move up, we're getting squished back here," called the baker. Through the park whizzed Grandpa Dan, Nikki, the baker, the barber, and the police chief, all on the long toboggan. Bump! Oomph! Crash! The mail carrier with a bag of letters landed on top of the police chief. "Sorry, Chief," said the mail carrier. "Get your mail bag off my lap and sit down," said the police chief. "This is my spot." "Good grief," Grandpa Dan yelled. "With everybody dancing around up there, I can't see a thing." Out of the park and onto the frozen lake went Grandpa Dan, Nikki, the baker, the barber, the police chief, and the mail carrier, all on the long toboggan. Take a minute, make a prediction. What do you think will happen next? Let's turn the page and see if you're right. Bump! Oomph! Crash! A hockey player landed on top of the mail carrier. "Penalty!" yelled the hockey player. "Interference!" "Oh, be quiet," said the mail carrier. "Everybody hold on," yelled Grandpa Dan. "Yahoo!" cried Nicky. Over the ice and straight toward a snowbank went Grandpa Dan, Nicky, the baker, the barber, the police chief, the mail carrier, and the hockey player, all on the long toboggan. Bump! Oomph! Crash! The toboggan flew into the snowbank, and suddenly bodies were tumbling in every direction. Hats, gloves, and scarves soared through the air. Grandpa Dan and Nicky landed in a bush. The baker and the barber landed in a tree. The police chief and the mail carrier and the hockey player landed in a garbage can. Oh dear. For a moment, nobody moved. Everything was quiet. Then Grandpa Dan and Nicky crawled out of the bushes. The baker and the barber climbed out of the tree. The police chief, the mail carrier, and the hockey player jumped out of the garbage can. Grandpa Dan grabbed the toboggan and began to run across the ice, his extra-long scarf flapping behind him. The baker, the barber, the police chief, the mail carrier, and the hockey player looked at each other. Then they started running too. Why do you think they're running? Take a minute and make a prediction. Let's see if you're right. "Wait, Grandpa Dan! Where are you going?" yelled Nicky. "If we hurry," he called back, "we can get in one more ride before dark." Well, I hope you enjoyed the Wild Toboggan Ride by Suzan Reid and Eugenie Fernandes. That was quite a wild ride, wasn't it? Well, we have another wild story for you, and this is by Jan Brett, and it's called The Wild Christmas Reindeer. I really love the illustrations that Jan Brett does. We'll have to point out some special features of those to you. For a start, you can see that every page is going to have a border. Tika was excited and a little afraid. This year, Santa had asked her to get the reindeer ready to fly on Christmas Eve. Tika had never done this before, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Tika lived up in the Arctic in the shadow of Santa's winter farm. The last of the snow geese had flown south, and everyone's mind was on Christmas. The workshop was alive with the sounds of saws sawing, hammers hammering, and brushes painting, as they all worked to have the toys and presents ready for delivery on Christmas Eve. Tika knew it was time for her to go in search of the reindeer. They had been out on the tundra, wild and free, since last Christmas, and Tika was sure they wouldn't want to go back to Winter Farm to train. She would have to be strong and firm. At last she found them. Bramble and heather, windswept and lichen, snowball, crag, twilight, and tundra. I'm guessing those aren't the reindeer names you're used to hearing, are they? Tika took a deep breath and shouted out, "Let's go! Move, move, move!" The reindeer were bewildered by Tika's voice. Their heads went up to see who this loud creature was. But they let her herd them together and headed back toward Winter Farm. Tundra gave her the most trouble. Tika didn't know that he considered himself the leader and was not used to being bossed around. He liked to stay next to Twilight, but she was separated from him and running near the front. When they got to the barn, Tika put them in different stalls. Tundra snorted impatiently. By the next morning, when Tika went into the barn, all the reindeer were restless and upset. Lichen was frightened of Crag, who kept nipping at him. Bramble was so worried she drove Heather wild, and Twilight kept calling out to Tundra, who was just plain angry and stamping his hooves. Tika groomed each reindeer. She wanted them to look sleek and glossy for Santa. One by one, she brushed and combed their coats and pushed and pulled at their tangled manes. She brushed so long and hard that their ears started to turn pink. Tika took the reindeer outside. Now she was ready for the real training to begin. Snowflakes danced in the air as she tried to stand them in two lines and put on their harnesses, but they wouldn't stay lined up. She had put Tundra at the back with Heather instead of at the front with Twilight, so he kicked out at Heather, who then bolted into Bramble. Tika scolded the reindeer. "Don't move," she cried, but they all ran off wild-eyed, and she had to go after them and bring them back. See how this border is like a candy cane? Isn't that nice? The next day, Tika harnessed the reindeer in the barn before taking them out into the snow. Everything went right until she got them lined up outside and tried to steer them, first to the left and then to the right. To make the sleigh fly, they would need to pull together smoothly, but everything went wrong. Tundra crashed into Heather, Snowball blew up at Bramble, Windswept knocked over Twilight, and then Lichen locked antlers with Crag. "Stop!" Tika cried as she watched the reindeer paw the air. "Unhook!" she shouted as they tried to free their long antlers. Then Lichen and Crag fell over into the snow. The harder they pulled, the more their antlers locked. The reindeer were frantic, and Tika only made it worse by yelling at them. See if I can get this open all the way. Tundra and Heather rushed to help, but the antlers did not break free. Windswept nudged at Lichen, and Bramble ran to help Crag. But the more they tried to help, the more they got tangled up themselves. Their necks strained and their muscles bulged, but their antlers did not budge. Tika wailed, "Oh, please, it's almost Christmas Eve." But the reindeer could not move. A frosty silence hung in the air. Tika looked at the tangled reindeer, once so bold and free, and began to cry. "It's my fault," she said. "I've spent all my time yelling at you instead of helping. I'm sorry." And one by one she gave each reindeer a hug. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go to work in a new way. No yelling, no screaming, and no bossing. I promise. Let me try to help you get free." The reindeer listened to this new voice. Heather's eyes sparkled. Crag cracked a reindeer grin. Bramble giggled, and Snowball sighed. Tundra laughed, and Twilight smiled. The more they laughed, the more they shook, and as they shook, their antlers rattled and rubbed. And before Tika could do anything, she heard a spring, spring, spring sound. It was the antlers jiggling free. Quietly, Tika led the reindeer back to the barn. She sleeked their coats. She gently brushed their ears and combed out their manes. Tundra nuzzled her cheek. The next day, the reindeer lined up in two lines, ready for the harness, with Twilight and Tundra leading the line. They practiced turning left and they practiced turning right. Tika directed them softly. Tundra pulled for Twilight. Bramble was gentle to Lichen. Windswept helped Heather, and Snowball nestled against Crag. Together they practiced, long and hard. They didn't notice that it was getting dark, and they almost didn't hear a jingle in the distance. It was Santa, standing by the sleigh piled high with presents and ready to go. Now the reindeer were ready too, and Tika led them to the sleigh. Santa smiled and nodded his thanks. Then he climbed aboard and waved to Tika, who watched as the wild reindeer rose up together and carried the sleigh off into the night. And there's Tika asleep after her hard work, huh? Well, I hope you enjoyed The Wild Christmas Reindeer by Jan Bratt. I'm Glenda Coleman, Youth Services Librarian, and this is our Library Bear. Thanks for visiting Weathersfield Proctor Library Storytime. We'll see you again. Bye.